I am a conservative, period. Like everyone else in this room and everyone else I have ever met at NatCon events. We don't need a label to explain that in this urgent moment with our republic at stake, national conservatism is the only kind of conservatism there is. It's no exaggeration. As I think about the future, to the extent that I can predict it, I think that decades from now, this convention this year will be remembered as the beginning of the future of the conservative movement and of the next era of American history. You might even say, accounting for the institution building that NatCon is leading, that we're in the Second American Revolution, a political, social, and cultural wresting from the left, all those institutions and centers of power they have steadily co-opted over several decades. In fact, it was that motivation, more than anything else, that propelled the so-called Reagan Revolution in 1980. The philosophical continuity between then and now is important to mention briefly. None other than historian Gordon Wood, in his magisterial Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Radicalism of the American Revolution, wrote that America's, quote, Republican Revolution was the greatest utopian moment in American history. The revolutionaries, he wrote, sought to reconstruct a society and governments based on virtue and disinterested public leadership, and to set in motion a moral movement that would eventually be felt around the globe. For us in this room, and for so many others aligned with our movement, Wood's summary of the American Revolution offers striking parallels to our own work nearly 250 years after America's independence. But today's establishment Washington doesn't understand this yet. Not unlike the stubborn coastal elites and centers of power in 1776, who moved only tepidly, if at all, to support the cause of American sovereignty. On the contrary, today's Beltway Republicans see the new right as just another interest group they have to manage. They think we're just another sliver of the Republican coalition that they think they lead. That's why here in the swamp, the question I'm most often asked about NatCon is, why? Why do we need another conference? Why do we need another group of conservatives writing op-eds, giving speeches, advocating policies? The reason's simple. They, Beltway Republicans, are the reason. The Washington Republicans asking those questions have for a generation failed this republic. Their messages, their policies, their leadership have hurt this nation. They've hurt the people, and they've hurt the Constitution they took an oath to defend. And for 3 decades, their failures have shared a single root cause, the unmooring of American conservatism from America itself. They put other things, self-interest, special interests, intellectual abstractions, ahead of the flesh and blood reality of we, the people of the United States. Ronald Reagan, whose nationalism and populism is often overlooked by some in our movement, said it well in his famous Time for Choosing speech 60 years ago. This is the issue of this election, Reagan declared. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite and a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan for ourselves. In short, NatCon is not a departure from conservatism. It is the single most glorious part of the continuity of conservatism because it serves the nation that we are so blessed to wake up in. It's no coincidence that in the generation since the end of the Cold War, America's descent into decadence and division followed the conservative movement splintering into rival factions. The toxic symptoms of America's post-Cold War decline are all around us. The fiscal time bomb, the cultural rot, the political corruption, the lawlessness, the erosion of our national sovereignty, military and diplomatic humiliations abroad, the building tyranny of the deep state, big tech and corporate media at home, taxpayer-financed fanatics preying on our children and families, the rule of law, our national heritage, and even our national identity. And the dangerous signals all of the above send to our enemies, starting in Beijing. There's plenty of blame to go around for these disasters, but there's also a painful lesson in them that we here at NatCon cannot look past. For all the wreckage this era of elite entitlement has wrought, the fact is that a united conservative movement serving first and foremost our nation, not an ideology or a party or a special interest, could have stopped almost all of those problems. Look at what happened to the American right after the Soviet Union collapsed, after the unifying existential threat to our nation disappeared, after Republican elites celebrated the so-called end of history by untethering their factions from the moral anchor of the American nation-state. Look at the libertarians who helped Ronald Reagan rescue the US economy, then descended into the hyper-individualism, materialism, and globalism that has rendered them a political irrelevancy, exemplified at this moment by their tone-deaf defense of Biden's open border policy as somehow being good for Americans. Or the neoconservatives, who did initially help sharpen conservative ideas on issues like education and welfare, and then succumbed to hubris. They tried to turn our republic into an empire and help squander Americans' Cold War peace dividend and moral capital on far-flung battlefields. Let's not forget the big business community, which went from heroically building the West's arsenal of democracy to becoming the corporate sponsors of anti-American activism and the Chinese Communist Party's terror state. Or the establishment right that claimed to represent America's so-called silent majority. Finally feeling free to embrace their native elitism, they gave us NAFTA, GATT, the World Trade Organization, open borders, and closed factories. In sum, Republican leaders forgot the nation they served. They discarded the conservatives of the heart who delivered them landslide victories in exchange for a new world order of the privileged, by the privileged, and for the privileged. Today, we still hear the vacuous phrase, rules-based international order, as if it's somehow more important than our own Constitution and the will of the American people. Just ask the establishment Tories in Britain how that conceit worked out on our Independence Day. Or the scores of globalists in NatCon's favorite city of Brussels, or the new president of the European Union is national conservative Viktor Orban, who promises to make Europe great again. There are countless other self-contradicting, hyphenated splinters of the old Eisenhower-Nixon-Reagan coalition still lingering around. Big government conservatives and small government conservatives, religious conservatives and post-religious conservatives, traditionalist conservatives and futurist conservatives, and everyone in between. But their stories are all part of the same story. The post-Cold War conservative movement failed because it became many movements, with too few of them tethered to the principle of the nation-state. At the time, it seemed like all these different factions were just competing to elevate their priorities over the other factions. But in hindsight, we can see that however well-intentioned, they were trying to raise their factional interests above the nation's. At every turn, it was everyday Americans who don't write for political magazines or fund political organizations or run political campaigns who were left behind. It was their jobs, their communities, their marriages, their kids who were sacrificed to ideological experiments and elite greed. For 3 decades, progressive extremists captured almost every institutional power center in America. And the GOP went along with it in exchange for lower tax rates and higher defense budgets. Now, we are living in the broken nation that non-national conservative leaders let the left build. All the while, the elite factions of this splintered movement pretended that the end of Soviet totalitarianism marked the end of existential threats to our way of life. Now we find that a new existential threat has grown up all around us. It is a threat not merely to a splintered conservative ideology or a magazine or a think tank, but to the nation that our elites assured us all along was safe. The post-Cold War conservative movement that was supposed to be an expression of, an advocate for, the United States as a whole came apart in petty, fractious self-promotions, and the country we love has suffered for it. All that suffering, from gutted communities to poisoned schools to crime-ridden streets to our screen-addled youth, would be more than enough reason for Americans to rise up and take their country back from the privileged elites who betrayed it. I think that's a fair description of what happened in 2016. That's when a blunt-talking political outsider promised to put America first and defeated the ultimate insider, Hillary Clinton, to win the presidency. Ever since Donald Trump came down that escalator, the media has sought to discredit him and the revived conservative movement he leads with this one scare word: nationalism. Specifically, they framed the debate between the new right and the new left as a contest between narrow-minded, intolerant, pessimistic nationalism and open-minded, tolerant, optimistic globalism. The bitter, never-Trump remnants of many hyphenated conservative factions love this framing. You can watch them flatter themselves on CNN or read them on corporate media op-ed pages any day of the week. I'm even told that a few people even still subscribe to their email newsletters. But I think too many genuine conservatives are too willing to accept this narrative too. I think we can be so eager to promote nationalism, to differentiate national conservatism from its splintered alternatives, that it's easy to miss that this framing is completely false. Not just in its depiction of the new right as close-minded and pessimistic, but in its assumption that the new globalist left itself is not nationalistic. This narrative's portrayal of the global elite as genial, tolerant liberals who just want to help the world self-actualize on a sustainable, interconnected planet is a fairy tale. It's a cover story for a multi-trillion-dollar experiment in iron-fisted global tyranny. Make no mistake, the new left, the woke left, everyone from climate activists to college DEI administrators to the squad, are as nationalistic as any jackbooted regime in history. It's just that their nation isn't the United States. Their nation can't be found on a map at all. No, their fidelity is to the nation they are slowly, meticulously building inside the public and private institutions they have captured and weaponized. There is a reason the so-called Great Awakening accelerated and darkened after 2016. It's because we fought back. As long as fractious conservatives in the US and elsewhere fought amongst themselves, the left was happy to cloak their despotic ambitions. They offered only cheery, innocent words like equality, diversity, and tolerance and sustainability. Remember, it was just a few years ago that Barack Obama campaigned under a banner of hope. All that ended after Brexit and Trump. Ever since, the left has taken off the mask. They've dispensed with the happy talk. They're so angry they don't even virtue signal anymore. They just bully and threaten. The elite left today has adopted a vocabulary as vengeful as its agenda. Woke tribal loyalty is now measured only in the lies progressives are willing to tell, laws they're willing to break, and the innocent people they are willing to hurt to achieve their ends. As Rachel so eloquently said, the new left do not see themselves as inheritors of Western civilization or American exceptionalism. Like the psychopaths of the French Revolution, they imagine themselves the founding fathers and mothers, with varying pronouns, of course, of something new. Call it Wakeland or Prideistan. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that leftists' moral, political, and spiritual loyalty now belongs to it, not the countries of their birth. It sounds far-fetched, except this new global regime already rules large swaths of our planet. Ask yourself, do you think the United Nations really serves the nations it supposedly unites? Is it a neutral forum for sovereign peoples to protect their diverse values and pursue their unique goals? Or is the UN an entity in itself, proposing and where possible imposing its creepy elite values on people they look down on like imperial conquerors? I could give you a long list of what the radical left does, but in sum, as you know all too well, for the radical left, politics, not the nation, trumps everything. And so, hedge fund managers sacrifice investors' returns to DEI activism. Scientists cover up COVID-19's origins. Public health agencies declare the coronavirus can't be spread at Black Lives Matter protests. The media cover up Hunter Biden's laptop and Joe Biden's mental decline, and they're proud of it. Boardrooms, classrooms, newsrooms, and committee rooms across the country and around the world already serve the new left's new nationalism, and we already know what they plan to do with it. The left's new America will have no written constitution and no rule of law, no independent judiciary, no democratic accountability or national sovereignty. It will be a global theocracy with Marxist fundamentalists sitting in its thrones, manning its bureaucracies, and menacing its enemies. It must be said that woke nationalism does have one thing in common with NatCon4. It absolutely wants to reunite the divided conservative movement. Unfortunately, it just wants to unite us all in prison. I know you don't expect the president of the Heritage Foundation to be mildly funny, but he appreciates the laughs. None of this, of course, is news to national conservatives. Indeed, as our first speakers have already noted, awareness of these stakes is why people who are national conservatives become so in the first place. But those who still haven't, who still cling to their sliver of the old fractured movement, must understand the real choice we now face. There is no third way anymore. Libertarians may not like populism, but the left's new America will erase individual freedom altogether. Neocons may not like the new right's prudent foreign policy, but the only alternative are those death to America chants at pro-Hamas rallies. Establishment Republicans must understand, too, eventually, that the radical left will afford them no committee chairmanships or corporate lobbying gigs. Ex-conservative, never-Trump performance artists must also understand that if the left succeeds, even their precious magazines, columns, and speaking fees will be taken from them. The new left we now face is not simply nationalistic in character. It is totalitarian in its mission. It is expansionist, imperialistic, and practically jihadist in its theocratic fanaticism. Given its international scope, limitless financial resources, and unprecedented technological sophistication, the global Uber nation the left is now building already threatens Americans more comprehensively and intimately than the USSR or any other adversary ever has. And against this adversary, a divided, hyphenated conservatism has no hope. This is why NatCon4 and the national conservative movement are so important. It's why I'm here. It's why you're here. It's why the Heritage Foundation has supported this movement, its leaders, and this conference. And though this may come as a surprise to some of you, it's also why I don't call myself a national conservative, in spite of cheering, living out, and enthusiastically supporting your cause. I am a conservative, period. Like everyone else in this room and everyone else I have ever met at NatCon events. We don't need a label to explain that in this urgent moment, with our republic at stake, national conservatism is the only kind of conservatism there is. The 20th century's great prophet of totalitarianism, George Orwell, famously said, "To see what is in front of one's nose is a constant struggle." Given the pace of the news cycle, our compromised attention spans, and the sheer volume of the left's treachery today, it's easy to miss just how far gone the fight to save our country already is. Look what's happening on college campuses, in blue cities and states, on the border, across Europe, in the Holy Land, in the E-ring of the Pentagon, and corner offices of the FBI and Justice Department. These are not glimpses of a possible future that could emerge if the left continues to gain power. They are what the left is already using their power to create. They want our lives to be worse. They want our freedoms curtailed and contingent on obedience to their inhuman cult. We simply won't defeat them by spouting abstract principles or advocating a niche vision of conservatism. We have to fight for the United States of America. For all its imperfections and internal divisions and broken institutions, this remains the only country we have and the only country that can ultimately defeat the radical left. By the way, I am hopeful that once that happens, other countries will follow. Forgive my American hubris. A generation hence, we're going to live in a place called the United States. But if the left succeeds, our republic will cease to be a nation at all, and certainly not a self-governing one. We'll be ruled from afar, subjects without rights, subservient to a religion without God, and a land without hope. These are the stakes and the challenge facing the conservative movement today. We must conserve our nation, or there will be nothing else to conserve. It is perhaps fitting for me to close with an extended observation from one of my favorite philosophers, Jacques Maritain. He wrote in 1943, "There is one thing that America knows well, and that she teaches as a great and precious lesson to those who come in contact with her astounding adventure. It is the value and dignity of the common man, the value and dignity of the people. America knows that the common man has a right to the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of the elementary conditions and possessions which are the prerequisites of a free life, and the denial of which, suffered by such multitudes, is a horrible wound in the flesh of humanity. The pursuit of the higher possessions of culture and spirit, here," he writes, "here, heroism is required, not to overcome tragedy, but to bring to a successful conclusion the formidable adventure begun with the Pilgrim Fathers and the pioneers and continued in the great days of the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War." To you, my friends, remember that this is our inheritance, and that what we do each day, this year, and in the years and decades to follow, continues this most noble effort in the history of mankind. This is the movement of, by, and for the United States of America, the forgotten nation that will be forgotten no more. Thank you, and God bless you.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 500,000 members of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, and Tim Kennedy. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.